Losing a loved one is difficult no matter the circumstances. The person is gone while others are left to grieve their loss. These feelings may even be stronger for parents who lose children. The loss of a child is unlike any other, says Regine Anderson, therapist at Centerstone. Losing a child is devastating. Along with their loss is the loss of good expectations, graduation, marriage, and grandkids, to name a few. But what about when parents, the people tasked with raising their child and bringing them up safely, are the reason that they are dead? Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we are going to be discussing the case of Lacey Fletcher and how her parents abandoned her in her own home. Details about this case are incredibly graphic and upsetting, and if you have struggled watching past videos of mine, I would recommend clicking off of this one. The professionals who worked on this case stated that after investigating, they had a hard time eating and sleeping for a week, as the details were stuck in their brains and caused them mental anguish. Your mental well-being is more important than a watch statistic. And if there is even an inkling in your mind that listening to this video will cause you mental anguish, I would suggest pausing here, going outside, and doing something productive. While this topic was widely requested, it's also incredibly hard to discuss. Take care of yourself first and foremost. This video, like the vast majority of my channel, has been demonetized by YouTube, as the content is, like I mentioned, graphic. With that in mind, if you want to support my brother and I and allow us to continue to make content full-time, consider supporting us over on Patreon. There you get access to videos early and can help us decide what videos to do next. I have always been forthcoming about the fact that should YouTube fully demonetize our channel, we will still post, but the Patreon is there just in case. With all of that said, let us begin. One of the biggest issues regarding this case is the victim, 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher, who was virtually unknown to the outside world for nearly 2 decades before her death. The only two people who could claim to really know her and discuss who she was are her parents, who are currently awaiting trial for her death. Growing up, Lacey struggled with social anxiety and anything to do with social interaction. She was described as an odd kid, and when she was 16 years old, she would be officially diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. People with ASD often have problems with social communication, interaction, and restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. People with ASD may also have differing ways of learning, moving, and paying attention. What's interesting about ASD is that it can present itself in vastly different ways, hence the term autistic spectrum disorder. There is a popular saying that if you've met one autistic person, you've only met the one autistic person, as two people with autism can act in different ways that are directly contradictory. According to people who have claimed to know Lacey prior to her diagnosis, it was clear that she was struggling in a school system that had no idea how to help her. She had a hard time interacting with others in school, and was cited as not being as mature as her peers. One of her classmates would recall that Lacey was, quote, definitely different from other kids her age. I knew she was not your typical teenager. She was smart. She was smart as hell. But I guess the best way to put it is that she wasn't as mature as us. She still liked children things, not teenage things. When she was 17 or 18, she was more into Disney movies and country music. She did invite us over to watch Disney movies, despite being more withdrawn. But that wasn't my forte. I was 18. I used to ride motorcycles. Unquote. She loved bowling, watching sports, and had a particular fondness for Disney World, learning everything she could about the theme park and telling everyone about the various things going on. Despite having a hard time engaging with others, she tried her best, often going on about her own special interests, without knowing that the person she was talking to didn't care. In some reports, Lacey was said to have been bullied, and eventually, everything culminated in her parents taking her out of school to homeschool her. Lacey receiving private care from the two people who loved her the most should have been a turning point in her life. They could provide her with a level of understanding and cooperation that the school system wasn't prepared for, and they could customize the lesson plan to fit Lacey's particular learning style. But when she began being homeschooled, it was as if she disappeared from society. Outside of 3 doctor's appointments over the span of 4 years, in which the Fletchers would complain about their daughter's behavior and, quote, reclusive lifestyle, unquote, Lacey was rarely seen outside. For years, Lacey would only be seen in passing, with her neighbor, 59-year-old Robert Blades, saying that he regularly saw her exercising on the street with weights. They never spoke. but he would nod at her occasionally. The last time he saw her, she would have been 21, at which point she was never seen outside again. According to an interview Blades would go on to do with the Daily Mail, he believed that Lacey had moved on or out of her parents' home. He thought she might have gotten married, moved into her own place, and established a life outside of the home she was raised in, as his son had done the same thing around her age. He was only informed otherwise when he spoke to Clay one morning, and was told that Lacey still lived with the family, but no longer liked to go out much. According to Blade's statement, Clay then changed the subject, clearly uncomfortable talking about his only child. She never contacted any of her old classmates, even electronically, and ceased to exist. Lacey seemed to be a sore spot for Clay and Sheila, who seemed to be more or less annoyed when they were talking about their daughter. According to some sources, they seemed disappointed that their daughter wasn't as big of a go-getter as they were, and often complained that they, quote, didn't sign up to be caretakers when they became parents, unquote. Most people who knew Sheila and Clay were unaware that they even had a daughter, as the couple were only ever seen in each other's company, and they never brought her up in conversation. Sheila Fletcher had worked as a police and court clerk in Baker, Louisiana, before working as an assistant to the city prosecutor in Zachary. She was incredibly active in the community, often being a staple at any city-thrown event. She was on the board of aldermen, which is similar to being on city council. As for Clay, according to state business filings and multiple reports, he worked as an officer of the nonprofit Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable, which has a mission to, quote, educate and foster an appreciation for the sacrifices made by all during the Civil War. Both were seemingly normal people in good financial standing and great physical health, which is why what they did to their daughter is so disturbing. The following portion of this video includes graphic images and descriptions. According to doctors and experts who have looked at the case, when Lacey was 24 years old, she sat down on her family's brown leather couch and was never able to get up. While sitting, likely watching a show with her family, Lacey began to experience locked-in syndrome, a rare neurological system disorder in which a person is paralyzed, save for the muscles that control their eye movements. People suffering from locked-in syndrome are conscious and aware of their surroundings. They can still think and reason, but they cannot move or speak, making their body a literal prison. In some instances, the sufferer is no longer able to feel pain in their body, but more often they can. Usually, locked-in syndrome occurs when part of a person's brainstem is damaged, usually by a stroke. It's unknown what caused Lacey's locked-in syndrome to manifest, but when it did, her parents were obliged to get her help. Many people who deal with locked-in syndrome go on to live fulfilling lives after some adjustment. Clay and Sheila could afford to get Lacey a live-in helper or place her in a home that was qualified to care for her needs, which would include physical therapy, comfort care, nutritional support, and prevention of complications from respiratory infections. However, Sheila and Clay decided not to. Instead, they allowed their child to sit cross-legged on the couch for 12 years, until her body quite sincerely fused together with the leather. When their only daughter was no longer able to speak to them, eat on her own, or stand up to go to the bathroom, neither parents thought it would be prudent to call 911 or even call a family doctor. Instead, they put some towels down next to her, that way when she went to the bathroom on the couch, they could clean it up somewhat. The remainder of their home was kept nice and clean, save for the spot where Lacey sat, trapped in her own body. Sometimes they would change Lacey's clothes for her, taking her out of the urine and feces-soiled pants she had originally sat down in, but otherwise she was stuck on the couch unable to move. As time went on, her clothes no longer fit on her emaciated frame and hung off of her, barely covering her naked body. Over time, her body bore its way into the couch cushions. She was soaked head to toe in urine, as well as feces and insect bites, and had bed sores that went down to her bone. There were maggots living in her hair, and she was suffering with chronic malnutrition, as well as acute starvation, immobility, acute ulcer formation, and osteomyelitis, which is bone infection which led finally to sepsis. For 12 years, Sheila and Clay lived their lives as normal, with the added caveat that they didn't allow anyone else to come into their home. They continued to work within the community and seemingly erased their daughter from existence as she wasted away on their couch. But on January 3rd, 2022, Sheila would finally be able to call 911 to report that Lacey had died. According to the 911 call, she was going to clean Lacey's sores when she noticed that her daughter was no longer breathing. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, and her mouth was open as well. Dispatch called for an ambulance and the coroner to come to the family's home, and the sight of Lacey's malnourished, feces-covered, 96-pound body was shocking. At once, the coroner knew that Lacey had been the victim of extreme neglect, and her family had simply allowed her to die in front of them. The following is taken from a Daily Mail article that will be linked below. This article describes the scene where Lacey was found from pictures that the police took. These pictures are so graphic in nature that the police refuse to allow the public to see them. Lacey appears almost buried up to her shoulders in the wide and deep hole in the sofa that her bony body has worn over the years, rubbing away the cushioning. She is slumped over on her left side, with her right arm across the top half of her emaciated body near her neck. She is naked apart from a small blue patterned t-shirt, which is pulled up to her chest and does not cover her breasts. Her eyes are wide open, staring. Her mouth is also open, revealing what appears to be a full set of front teeth. Her legs are pulled up and crossed underneath her, ironically in a way that people can make themselves comfortable. But in Lacey's case, it was a posture of a bid to survive. Her face is covered in large and angry red blotches. Excrement is smeared almost all over her body. It is matted in her hair. It is even inside her ears. The brown leather sofa that served as her prison is alongside the wall, with a gap of about 18 inches. Astonishingly, to the couch's right side is a gray commode and a neat pile of clothes. And to the front, only a few feet away, is a cluttered, low black table. It is strewn with lotion bottles, some talcum powder, a pack of wipes, a nasal spray, a box with a lid that had a child's photo on it, and some other items that make it appear the Fletchers had the resources to clean their stricken only child. Between the sofa and the table are two neatly stacked boxes of DVDs. It is not possible to discern the titles, but some appear to be childlike from the covers. Desperately sad photos of Lacey, taken later on a physician's steel table for a forensic examination, further reveal the extent of her harrowing and so far unexplained ordeal. She weighed just 96 pounds when discovered dead in the early hours of January 3rd. Close-ups show the flesh on her buttocks appears to be literally worn or eaten away by the 12 years that she hadn't moved from the couch. There are large, raw yellow areas where the skin has disappeared. Other back and buttock areas are so blackened it is impossible for a lay person to identify any shape or form. When Sheila called 911, Lacey had already been dead for between 24 to 48 hours, and neither of her parents had noticed. When talking to authorities, Sheila and Clay stated that it had been Lacey's own decision to sit in her filth for all those years, and while they didn't like that she did that, they didn't know what else to do. Sheila Fletcher allegedly maintained that she routinely cleaned her daughter's bed sores, and her daughter never complained about them, despite the fact that they were so deep you could see the bone. As we know, Lacey couldn't have complained about it as her diagnosis would have made it impossible for her to talk. It would be 4 months until Sheila and Clay were formally arrested and charged with second-degree murder, which allegedly shocked them. After being charged, their lawyer told the media, quote, "They don't want to relive the pain of losing a child through the media. They have been through a lot of heartache over the years. Anyone who has lost a child knows what that's like." He also claimed that Lacey didn't have locked-in syndrome, and instead was simply too lazy to move. The two are currently out on bail, and their trial is set for June 19th, 2023. Lacey was a bright young girl who could have had a bright future, but because her parents failed to get her any sort of help for 12 years, she was left to rot away on a couch in her living room. This is one of the most harrowing cases we have covered, and it was entirely preventable. If her parents had, at any point, called a local physician or a home care nurse, Lacey would be alive today. As this case is still ongoing, I will likely follow this video up in the future. If you would like to see that video and any future videos, consider subscribing. If you like this content, please like this video as it does help with YouTube showing you our future content. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day and remember to stay safe.